James Collins gave up after the third coughing fit. The thermometer on the bedside table read 39 and 4, and his head throbbed as if a small hammer were pounding inside. He leaned back against the pillows with a groan, recognizing the obvious. He wouldn't be able to go to work today. "Damn it," James muttered, glancing at his watch. 8 o'clock in the morning. In 2 hours a meeting was to begin on the case of an international syndicate of arms smugglers whose trail led clearly to Lisbon, an American exclave and diplomatic enclave in Portugal. Amara came into the bedroom with a cup of hot tea when she heard her husband coughing. "You need to see a doctor," she said, sitting down on the edge of the bed and handing the cup to her husband. "There's no time," Collins said, coughing again. "The meeting's at 10, and I need the documents from the safe in my office." The smartphone on the nightstand vibrated demandingly. Tyler Green, his deputy, was already inquiring if the director would be at the meeting. James sat up uneasily on the bed, feeling the room slowly spinning around him. "I need you to go to the office and get the file from my safe," he said to his wife, sipping his tea. "Can you do that right now?" Amara Collins, a law professor at the American University of Lisbon, looked at her watch. She had time before her first lecture started at 11. "Sure, I'll be back before my classes start," she nodded. "What exactly do you need?" "The red folder, top shelf of the safe," James explained. "The code is 48923112. Got it?" "Don't worry, I'll write it down," Amara replied, adjusting her husband's pillows. "You get some rest. I'll be back soon." James squeezed his wife's hand gratefully and sent a message to Tyler. "Can't attend the meeting. High fever. Amara will get the documents from the safe and bring them to me. I'll work from home." Amara quickly gathered herself, and after one last check of her husband's temperature, headed for the door. "I'll be right there," she shouted from the hallway. "The medicine is on the nightstand. Don't forget to take it." At the same time, in another part of Lisbon, Officer Ryan Bennett stood silently in front of the bathroom mirror of his rental apartment. His reflection looked tired. The red streaks in the whites of his eyes and gray skin gave away the sleepless night. 3 years on the Lisbon American police force had brought him neither promotion nor the respect of his colleagues. "Damn liberals and their political correctness," he muttered, buttoning his uniform shirt. Bennett knew that his last remark about disadvantaged neighborhoods and their inhabitants had been the cause of another reprimand from Captain Souza. A female chief and of Portuguese descent, she had, in Bennett's opinion, only gotten the position because of diversity quotas. Bennett sighed, remembering his former life in small-town Oklahoma, where things were simpler and more straightforward. Here, in international Lisbon, he felt like an outsider, even though he was officially on U.S. soil. Slamming the apartment door, he went downstairs. It was going to be a long day. The police station buzzed like a disturbed beehive. Captain Maria Souza stood in front of a projector showing a map of recent robberies. "There have been 4 raids on office buildings in the diplomatic quarter in the last 2 weeks. Her accent became more noticeable when she was agitated. "The most recent incident occurred yesterday in a building across from the embassy. The criminals are purposely looking for documents and electronic media." Bennett, who was sitting in the far corner of the room, looked at his colleagues. Most of them were taking notes and scrutinizing the materials. He, on the other hand, felt irritated. Another useless meeting instead of real work on the streets. "Do we have a description of the suspects?" one of the officers asked. Souza nodded and switched the slide. "According to witnesses, it's a group of 3 to 4 men, presumably Eastern Europeans or Middle Easterners. However, the last robbery involved a woman. Dark skin, medium height, early 40s. Security cameras only captured a blurry silhouette." Bennett straightened in his chair. Finally, something concrete. He drew a schematic portrait in his notebook. Dark skin, female, 40. A familiar image formed in his mind at once. "All patrol officers will be issued a bolo," Souza continued. "Pay special attention to buildings with government offices. There's reason to believe the next target could be the FBI building." An excited whisper swept through the room. Bennett hummed. If he were in command of the operation, he would have organized round-the-clock patrols and ID checks for all suspicious persons, especially those who didn't look like typical Americans. "Increased patrols around the government buildings today," Sousa summarized. Bennett, you're on the evening shift at the Federal Building. Yes, Captain, Bennett replied, feeling satisfied. Finally, a real assignment instead of paperwork. After the briefing, a young officer named Rodriguez approached Bennett. Heard you had another fight with the captain? He asked with a chuckle. None of your business, Bennett snapped back. Why don't you mind your own business? Hey, relax. Rodriguez held up his hands in a conciliatory tone. It's just a joke. Hey, why don't we grab a beer after shift? There's a new bar opening up nearby. Bennett grunted, holstering his holster. I got other plans, he mumbled, not wanting to explain that his only plan was a lonely evening with a bottle of whiskey and old photos from Oklahoma. As Bennett prepared for his shift, Amara was already pulling up to the FBI building. The guard at the entrance to the garage recognized her and waved hello. Good morning, Mrs. Collins. How is the director's health? Unfortunately, not so good, Amara sighed. High fever. I'll get the papers. Come in, the guard nodded, raising the barrier. Give him our wishes for a speedy recovery. Amara parked in the visitor's lot and hurried to the entrance of the building. She didn't have much time before her own lectures began. In the lobby, she presented her ID card as the wife of an employee and explained the purpose of her visit. The officer on duty, who knew her by sight, nodded and issued a temporary pass. 5th floor, as usual, he smiled. Correct the director. We're missing him. Amara took the elevator to her husband's office. The lock clicked quietly. It was empty and quiet inside. She'd never liked this office. Too formal, too sterile. There seemed to be nothing of the real James she'd known at home, a jazz aficionado, a collector of old vinyl records, and an avid reader of historical novels. The only person here was Principal Collins, a stern, understated professional. The safe was behind a painting of a view of Washington, D.C. Amara dialed the code she'd written down on a piece of paper, 48923112. The door opened silently. Inside, just as James had said, was a red folder labeled Top Secret. Amara took the folder, closed the safe, and hurried back inside. The clock read 9:20. With luck on the road, she'd be home in time to give the paperwork to her husband and get to the university in time for her lecture. Meanwhile, the phone rang in Agent Tyler Green's office. Agent Green speaking. Tyler, it's James. Amara has already picked up the paperwork and is on her way back. I won't be able to attend in person, but I'd like to discuss the details of the case. Can you get me on a secure line? Of course, Director, Green replied. I hope you feel better soon. Thank you, Tyler. I'll have the documents in half an hour. Have a team ready by 10. Green sighed as he hung up the phone. He respected Collins, but sometimes his dedication to his job seemed excessive. Even with a fever of 40, he continued to direct operations. Captain Souza had finished her briefing as well. She held her gaze on Bennett leaving the room. His record was mixed. On the one hand, he was a brave officer with good reactions. On the other, his views and attitudes toward immigrants were increasingly questionable. After the reprimand 3 weeks ago, she had hoped he would change his behavior, but it seemed that hope had been in vain. Captain, Lieutenant Morales called out to her. Are you sure it's a good idea to send Bennett out on patrol alone, after the last incident? I understand your concerns, Sousa nodded, but we can't keep him on paperwork forever. We'll give him another chance. After all, he's a good cop, just with outdated views. Morales shook his head, but didn't argue. After all, it was the captain's decision. Amara pulled out of the FBI parking lot and headed home. The red folder tucked safely in her bag seemed heavier than it should have been. She knew she had no right to look inside, but her professional lawyer curiosity sometimes took over. What secrets did those pages hold? Whose fates depended on the information she was now carrying? The traffic light ahead switched to red, and Amara stopped, drumming her fingers on the steering wheel. She'd planned today's lecture on international law, but her thoughts kept returning to her sick husband. Perhaps she should have called a doctor, despite his protests. Back at the station, Bennett was changing into his patrol uniform. He carefully polished his badge and checked his gear. Tonight, he would be one of the men protecting the peace of the citizens. Real police work. Not like sitting in an office filling out reports. Amara got home at 9:45 sharp. James, still pale but already sitting at his laptop, gratefully accepted the folder. "You saved my meeting," he smiled as he opened the documents. "How did it go at the office?" "No problem," Amara replied, kissing her husband on the forehead. "Security sends their best wishes for a speedy recovery, and I agree with them. You need rest, not work." "After the meeting," James promised, already immersed in his reading. "Go to your lectures. I can handle it." Amara shook her head, but didn't argue. Over the years of marriage, she'd learned to pick her battles. This one she'd lost before it even started. "Just don't forget to take your medication," she reminded her as she packed up her things for the university. "I'll be back after 3. James nodded absently, already fully absorbed in his work. Amara sighed and headed for the door. Just another normal day at the federal director's household. James had spent the entire morning and half of the afternoon working on the case files. His condition had improved a little with the medication, but his temperature still hovered at 38.5. At 13 o'clock, his laptop made the distinctive sound of a video call. "Director." Tyler Green's face looked concerned on the screen. "How are you feeling?" "I've been better," James answered honestly. "But we're making progress with the case. What's the latest?" "After the meeting, we received additional material on the smugglers. The connection to the local gang has been confirmed. And there's new physical evidence, samples of the weapons they tried to smuggle out." James frowned. "We need to look into this. Can you send a courier with the materials?" "Unfortunately, that's not possible." Green shook his head. "The level of secrecy is too high, and the nature of the evidence requires a personal review by an authorized officer. I've been authorized to leave everything in your safe under your responsibility." "I see," Collins sighed. "I'll have to ask Amara again." "Can she do that?" Green asked doubtfully. "She should. Her last lecture ends at 16. I'll call her." After the call ended, James reached for the phone. A new coughing fit twisted him, and it took a few minutes to regain his breath. He hated asking his wife for the second time that day, but there was no choice. Amara was just finishing her lecture when her phone rang. Seeing her husband's name, she frowned and answered it quickly. "James, are you feeling worse?" "No, I'm fine." His voice sounded guilty. "But some new case files have come in. Tyler left them in my safe. I hate to ask you to do this, but—" "You want me to go to your office again?" Amara finished for him, trying to hide her irritation. "If it's possible. I realize that's too much to ask." Amara sighed, glancing at her watch. It was almost 16:30. "Okay, I'll stop by. But next time, have your deputy bring you the documents himself." "Thank you, dear." James sounded genuinely relieved. "The code is the same, 48923112. It's a blue folder in a small sealed box." "I'll be home around 18, she answered. "Try not to work too hard before you have another attack." Hanging up the phone, Amara mentally rearranged the evening. She'd have to put off checking student papers and making dinner. She shook her head, reflecting on how often James's work intruded on their personal lives. Sure, she understood the importance of his position, but sometimes she felt like the FBI was taking her husband away from her, even when he was physically around. After gathering her things, Amara headed to the parking lot. The evening Lisbon lights were already turning on and the traffic was getting heavier. It was about a 30-minute drive to the FBI building if they were lucky with traffic. At the same time, Officer Bennett went on evening duty. He patrolled the area of the government buildings, keeping a close eye on passers-by. Captain Souza's instructions were still echoing in his head. Special attention to suspicious persons, possible infiltration of the FBI building, a dark-skinned woman among the suspects. "Central Station to Patrolman Bennett," the radio said. "Bennett here," the officer said. "There's a report of a suspicious person in your patrol area, 24 block, near the north entrance to the federal building. Check and report." "Copy that. I'm on my way." Bennett felt a rush of adrenaline. Maybe today he'd be lucky enough to catch one of the robbers Souza had mentioned. He quickened his step, keeping his hand on his holster. The evening shadows made the streets more unsettling, and oncoming passers-by seemed suspicious. Bennett remembered his years of service in Oklahoma, where things were simpler. There he knew all the locals by sight and could spot a stranger at a glance. Amara parked in front of the FBI building at 1720. There was a different guard on duty at the entrance than the one from this morning, but he recognized her, too. "Good evening, Mrs. Collins. To see your husband again?" "Yes, the papers again," Amara smiled. "He's still sick, but he's still working." "That's what they do." The guard nodded understandingly. "Come on in." The building was much quieter than it had been during the day. Most of the employees had already gone home, and the lights were dimmed in the hallways. Amara took the elevator to the 5th floor and walked to her husband's office. Inside, it was the same as it had been in the morning, empty and official. She opened the safe, dialing the code again. This time inside was a blue folder labeled Top Secret and a small sealed box. Amara carefully pulled out both items, placed them in her bag, and closed the safe. Meanwhile, Bennett had reached the designated neighborhood. He slowly walked around the perimeter of the federal building, peering into the shadows. So far, nothing suspicious was visible. He was about to report no intruders when he saw movement at the side exit. A tall, dark-skinned woman was leaving the building at a brisk pace. She was carrying a bulky bag, from which the edge of a folder was visible. Bennett froze. The description matched the orientation perfectly. Dark-skinned, mid-40s, average height. And she was clearly carrying something from the federal building. The officer's heart quickened. This was his luck. A picture instantly formed in his mind. A robber who had just committed an ID theft. Protocol required that she identify herself first, then demand a stop, and only if she was insubordinate or aggressive would she use her weapon. But Bennett, seeing the woman speeding toward the parking lot, decided to act differently. In one motion, he drew his gun and pointed it at the woman. "Freeze! Police!" he shouted, stepping out of the shadows. "Drop the bag on the ground! Now!" Amara froze, unable to believe her eyes. A policeman with a gun pointed at her looked really threatening. She slowly raised her free hand, holding the bag in the other. "Officer, there's been a mistake," she said as calmly as possible. "I'm Principal Collins' wife, Amara Collins. I was picking up some paperwork for my husband. He's sick and works from home." "I said drop the bag." Bennett took a step forward without lowering his weapon. "On the ground, hands behind your head." "Officer, please." Amara felt her heart pounding in her chest. "You can call my husband or check with security. I've been cleared on the paperwork." "On the ground, last warning." Bennett was adamant. In his eyes, this woman fit the description of a mugger perfectly. He wasn't going to believe what she said about being some CEO's wife. Typical criminal ploy. Amara slowly lowered her bag to the pavement, not understanding why the officer was unwilling to verify her words. She felt a growing fear mixed with indignation. "I'm a law professor," she said firmly. "What you are doing is illegal. You are required to identify yourself and show cause for detention." "One more word and I will use force," Bennett cut off, pulling out his walkie-talkie. "Central, this is Patrolman Bennett. I've got a suspect in a federal building ID theft. Requesting backup." "There's been a mistake!" Amara couldn't take it anymore. "Check my ID! Call building security!" Bennett took a step forward, aiming for her chest. "I said shut up! On the ground! Hands on your head!" At that moment, Agent Tyler Green came out of the side entrance of the building. When he saw the scene unfolding, he froze in place and then quickly ran over to them. "Officer, put your weapon down!" he shouted in a commanding tone. "This is Mrs. Collins, the wife of the FBI director." Bennett turned around without lowering his gun. "Identify yourself," he demanded. Green pulled out an ID. "Tyler Green, Deputy Director of the FBI for the Lisbon office. Now put the gun down immediately, officer." Bennett hesitated. Part of him was still convinced he was looking at a criminal, and this man could be her accomplice. "I saw her coming out of the loading dock with a suspicious bag," he said. "We have a group of thieves in the building, one of whom fits her description." Green stepped between Bennett and Amara. "Officer, I personally left these documents in Principal Collins's safe this afternoon. I know Mrs. Collins personally. She took them with the authorization of her husband and the FBI brass. Put it down, your own, weapons." The last words were spoken in such a tone of voice that Bennett reluctantly lowered his gun, but did not holster it. "Mrs. Collins, are you all right?" Green turned to Amara, who was still standing frozen in place. Yes. No. I don't know. Her voice shook. That officer pointed a gun at me for no reason. He refused to check my ID or contact security. Green turned to Bennett. Name, badge number, and precinct. Officer Ryan Bennett, badge number 4271, East Precinct. He replied reluctantly. I acted on the orientation I received. Dark skin, female, 40 years old, coming out of the building with ID. You just pointed a gun at the wife of a federal director, Green said stiffly. On a civilian with all the necessary authorizations and documents, offering no resistance. You violated at least 6 points of the arrest protocol. Get out of here now before I call internal security. I was doing my job, Bennett objected stubbornly. If she really was a thief. But she's not a thief, Green almost shouted. And if you had bothered to check her identity before you pulled a gun on her, you would have known that. Bennett's walkie-talkie came to life. Central to Patrolman Bennett. Backup is on the way. Report current status. Bennett picked up the walkie-talkie. Backup out. Misidentification. Situation under control. Copy that, the voice on the walkie-talkie replied. Return to patrol. Bennett backed away reluctantly, but he gave Amara one last look that was a mixture of suspicion and dislike. I was just doing my job, he mumbled, and disappeared around the corner of the building. Amara was finally able to exhale. Her hands trembled as she picked the bag up off the ground. Thank you, Mr. Green, she said softly. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't come out. You're welcome, Mrs. Collins, Green replied, still looking in the direction Bennett had gone. This should never have happened. I shall report the incident myself. What did he mean about the orientation? Amara asked as they headed to her car. There have been some thefts from government buildings in recent weeks, Green explained. But that's no excuse for this kind of behavior. He should have introduced himself first, asked for identification, and certainly not pointed a gun at you for no reason. How's Director Collins? Better, but still with a fever, Amara replied, trying to calm down. He's working from home. Give him my best wishes for a speedy recovery. Green opened the car door for her. And don't worry about this incident. I'll take care of it. Amara sat behind the wheel, still feeling her heart pounding. Only now did she fully realize what had happened. The cop had pointed a gun at her just because she fit the description, dark skin, female, 40 years old, without checking, without identification, without the slightest attempt to find out who she was. Outrage began to break through the shock. She was a law professor, the wife of a high-ranking federal employee, and yet Officer Bennett saw her only as a suspect. Only because her skin color matched the description. Starting the car, Amara made a decision. This incident must not go unreported. Bennett, meanwhile, continued his patrol, mentally cursing his bad luck. He was sure he was doing the right thing. If a person fit the description of a suspect and behaved suspiciously, it was the officer's duty to react. It wasn't his fault this woman turned out to be someone's wife. And why didn't she just follow his orders? Then everything could have been cleared up quietly, without this FBI agent looking at him like dirt under his feet. Bennett was well aware that there would be a complaint. He could already picture Captain Souza reprimanding him, his colleagues sneering, further proof that he didn't fit in this new, too soft world. The radio came back on. All patrol officers, return to the station to file reports. Bennett sighed and headed back. He didn't yet know that his police career would be over in less than 12 hours. Amara pulled up to the house at 18:30. Her hands were still shaking slightly, but she had already pulled herself together. James shouldn't see her in this state. He needed peace, not extra worry. But as soon as she entered the house, James took one look at his wife and knew something was wrong. Amara, what happened? He got up from the couch where he'd been working on his laptop. She wanted to lie, to say everything was fine, but she couldn't. The tears she'd been holding back the whole trip suddenly sprang from her eyes. The policeman. My voice trailed off. He pulled a gun on me, James, just because I fit some stupid description. James froze in place, unable to believe his ears. He did what? James Collins's voice, normally calm and composed, was now ringing with rage. Amara sat on the couch, clutching a cup of hot tea. The stress was starting to wear off, but her hands were still visibly shaking. "He pointed a gun at me," she repeated. "He didn't even check for ID. He just saw a dark-skinned woman coming out of the building with a bag and assumed I was a thief." James gritted his teeth. His face had gone pale, but not from illness, but from anger. "Name?" he asked briefly. "Bennett. Officer Ryan Bennett." Amara took a sip of tea. Luckily, Mr. Green stepped out at that moment. I don't know what would have happened if he hadn't intervened. James silently picked up his cell phone and dialed a number. Despite his high fever and general weakness, his voice sounded perfectly clear when the connection was established. "Tyler? James Collins. I need complete information on Officer Ryan Bennett. Now." Amara looked at her husband, simultaneously proud of his determination and worried about his health. James looked like he was about to fall, but stood straight, taut as a string. "Yes, she's home, safe," he continued. "But that doesn't change what happened." "Right. I want an official investigation. Yes, right away." He hung up the phone and sat down next to his wife, taking her hands in his. "I'm sorry I put you in such danger," he said quietly. "If I had known—" "It wasn't your fault," Amara shook her head. "No one could have guessed that a routine request to pick up documents would turn into something like this." James's phone rang again. This time, the conversation was shorter. "Thank you, Tyler," he said, listening to the person on the other end of the line. "Yeah, I'll be there in 30 minutes. "Are you going to drive?" Amara said worriedly. "James, you still have a fever." "It's out of the question," he said firmly, rising. "I want to make sure that this man never comes near a service weapon again." Meanwhile, the police station in Lisbon's Eastern District was unusually lively for the evening. Captain Maria Sousa had just received a call that forced her to summon the entire precinct leadership for an emergency meeting. "What exactly happened?" she asked Lieutenant Morales, reviewing Bennett's report. According to Bennett, he noticed a suspicious woman leaving the federal building and attempted to detain her, Morales replied. But it turned out to be FBI Director Collins's wife. "Jesus," Sousa said, leaning back in her chair. "How the hell did he do that?" Bennett claims he followed protocol, saw a suspicious person matching the APB and reacted. "Pulled a gun on a civilian without checking ID?" Sousa was outraged. "That's a blatant violation of protocol. Where is he now?" In the interrogation room, writing a detailed report. Sousa rubbed her temples. This was the third incident involving Bennett in the last year. First, a complaint from a Moroccan immigrant who was wrongfully stopped and frisked by an officer, then rudeness toward a black married couple who'd called the police because of noisy neighbors. And now this. "Captain, we got a call from the federal director's office." The duty officer peered into the office. "Collins is on his way here personally." "Great," Sousa sighed. "Get all of Bennett's files ready. Personnel file, previous complaints, results of internal investigations." "Aye, Captain." As the door closed, Sousa turned to Morales. "You warned me about him. I should have listened." "Don't blame yourself," the lieutenant shook his head. "We all wanted to believe he would change." Ryan Bennett sat in the interrogation room, filling out an incident report. He tried to choose his words so that his actions seemed justified. Noticed a suspicious person matching the orientation. Took steps to apprehend. Subject refused to comply with lawful demands. Suddenly the door opened and Sergeant Rodriguez walked in. "You're in big trouble, Bennett," he said without preamble. "Why? I was doing my job," Bennett snapped back. "It's not my fault some important person was in the wrong place at the wrong time." "Some important person?" Rodriguez shook his head. "Do you realize what you've done? You pointed a gun at the federal director's wife. Collins is on his way here personally." Bennett swallowed. Even he realized this was serious, but his inner stubbornness wouldn't let him admit the mistake. "She fit the description of the suspect. I was following instructions. The manual requires you to identify yourself and check your documents first, not to wave a gun around," Rodriguez exclaimed. "You know, I never understood why you were tolerated in the department. Now I guess I won't have to." With these words, he went out, leaving Bennett alone with his gloomy thoughts. For the first time all evening, the officer began to realize the real consequences of his actions. At 19:30, a black squad car pulled up to the station house. Despite the informal nature of the visit, James Collins was dressed in a strict suit. Only the pallor of his face and the feverish glint in his eyes betrayed his sickly condition. Tyler Green, who accompanied the director, watched him anxiously. "Sir, maybe we should have postponed this until tomorrow. You need to rest." "No," Collins cut him off. "The sooner we get this over with, the better, for everyone." Captain Souza met them in the lobby. Her face was tense but determined. "Director Collins," she held out her hand. "I'm truly sorry about this incident. How is your wife?" "Scared and outraged," James replied, shaking her hand. "So am I. May we speak privately, Captain?" "Of course, follow me." Lieutenant Morales was waiting for them in Souza's office with a folder of documents. After a brief introduction, everyone took their seats around the desk. "We've already started an internal investigation," Souza began, "and I have to admit that the preliminary findings are disappointing for Officer Bennett." "I want to hear his side of the story," Collins said. "He claims he was acting on a tip," Souza replied. "He said your wife matched the description of the suspect and behaved suspiciously when she left the federal building in the evening with a bag of documents. And that's why he decided to point a gun at her without an ID check?" Collins sounded cold. "That is exactly what is a gross violation of protocol," Souza nodded. "An officer is required to first identify himself, then ask for the suspect's ID, and only in the case of aggression or an attempt to flee can he use more severe measures. As far as I understand, my wife was not aggressive or attempting to flee?" "No, sir. According to Agent Green, she was trying to explain the situation." James clenched his fists so white his knuckles turned white. "I want to know everything about this officer, a complete personnel file." Morales handed him a folder. "It's all in here, including previous complaints and the results of the proceedings." Collins opened the folder and began to look through the documents. With each page he turned, his face grew darker and darker. "2 complaints in the last year," he finally said, "both related to mistreatment of ethnic minorities, and both times a reprimand without serious repercussions. Why?" Souza sighed. "We couldn't prove that his actions were motivated by racial bias. In both cases, he gave formal justifications for his actions, but after today, the picture is clear." Collins finished firmly for her. "This man should not be wearing a badge. Not in my town." "I completely agree, Director," Souza nodded. "The paperwork for his termination has already been prepared. All that's required is formal approval from the board." "How soon can that happen?" "Under normal circumstances, it would take a few days. But given the seriousness of the incident and your personal involvement, I can convene an emergency meeting today. Most of the commissioners are still at their desks." "Do it." Collins closed the folder. "I want to talk to him." "Sir, this could compromise the procedure," Green said cautiously. "I'm not going to threaten or intimidate him," James replied coldly. "I just want to look the man who pulled a gun on my wife in the eye and ask him why." Souza glanced at Morales, then nodded. "Okay, he's in the interrogation room. I'll walk you out." Bennett looked up as the door of the room opened. The man who entered, dressed in a strict suit, exuded such authority that the officer straightened in his chair. "Officer Bennett," Collins said, taking the seat across from him. "I'm James Collins, Director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation for Lisbon County, and the husband of the woman you pointed a gun at today." Bennett remained silent, staring at the desk. Everything that was happening seemed like a nightmare to him. "I want to hear from you why you thought my wife was a criminal," continued Collins. "She matched the description of the suspect," Bennett muttered. "Dark skin, female, mid-40s. She left the building with her ID. We had an APB. And that's why you drew your weapon immediately, without bothering to check her identity?" "I followed protocol," Bennett repeated stubbornly. "No, officer." Collins's voice grew even colder. "Protocol requires that you identify yourself first, then ask for identification, and only if there's a clear threat do you use a weapon. You skipped all those steps. Why?" Bennett remained silent, avoiding the director's gaze. "I've studied your case," Collins continued. "This isn't the first incident like this. You tend to assume the worst about people of a certain appearance, don't you?" "I'm just doing my job," Bennett muttered. "Protecting citizens." "From what? Law-abiding law professors who happen to be the wrong color?" Collins stepped forward. "Listen to me carefully, officer. You made an unforgivable mistake today, but the worst part is, you don't even think it was a mistake. You really believe you were right to assume the worst about my wife, just because of her looks." Bennett finally looked up. "I was doing my duty. If she really was a thief, and I didn't react, I would have been charged with negligence." "No, officer," Collins shook his head. "You could have responded according to protocol. Introduce yourself, politely ask for identification, checked her history with building security. Instead, you took the most aggressive approach." He stood up, resting his hands on the desk. "In an hour, the board will meet to decide on your dismissal. I don't doubt the outcome. But I want you to understand, it's not that she turned out to be my wife. It's about how you do your job. Police are supposed to protect all citizens, not intimidate those who look wrong." With those words, Collins walked out, leaving Bennett in complete silence. At 21,000, the Lisbon Police Department's Emergency Commission voted unanimously to fire Officer Ryan Bennett for grossly violating protocol, endangering the life of a civilian, and undermining confidence in the police. At 21:35, Bennett surrendered his badge, his service weapon, and left the precinct building through the back door to avoid the reporters already on duty at the main entrance. James Collins returned home around 22 o'clock, completely exhausted, but with a sense of accomplishment. Amara met him in the living room. "How did it go?" she asked, helping her husband out of his coat. "He was fired," James answered, sinking down onto the couch. A unanimous decision by the board. Amara sat down next to him, taking his hand. "So soon?" Usually such procedures took days, if not weeks. "The case was egregious," James shrugged. "Besides, it wasn't his first incident. It was just that he'd gotten away with it before." They sat in silence for a while. Finally, Amara spoke up. "You know what struck me the most? The fact that I wasn't even surprised. When I saw the gun pointed at me, I was frightened, outraged, but not surprised. It was like somewhere deep inside I'd always expected something like that." James gripped her hand tighter. "I'm sorry. I always knew it happened, but I never thought it would affect you." "It's not about you," Amara shook her head. "It's about the system that allows people like Bennett to get a badge and a weapon. A system where my skin color automatically makes me suspicious to some people." "Systems are made by people," James said thoughtfully. "And people can change them. Maybe this case will be the catalyst for a review of the Lisbon Police Department's selection and training procedures." "Maybe." Amara rested her head on his shoulder. "But how many of these Bennetts are still wearing a badge? And how many people who don't have an FBI director husband face prejudice every day?" James didn't answer. He was well aware that the Bennett case was just the tip of the iceberg. One firing would not change a system that had been entrenched for decades. "What do you plan to do next?" Amara asked after a pause. "First get better," James smiled weakly. "And then, I think we should organize joint training for the police and the FBI. Raise screening standards, maybe revise arrest protocols." Amara nodded thoughtfully. "And we should also introduce a course on unconscious biases and their influence on decision-making into the curriculum. I could help develop it." "That's a great idea." James kissed her forehead. "Are you okay? After everything that happened?" "I'll be fine," Amara sighed. "I just need time to process it. You know, for a moment when he pointed the gun at me, I wasn't thinking about myself. I was thinking, what if it had been one of my students or an elderly neighbor? How would they have handled that kind of stress?" James put his arm around his wife. "We'll make sure it doesn't happen again, I promise." Outside the window, Lisbon was sheltering in the darkness of night. Somewhere in the city, ex-officer Ryan Bennett was sitting in a bar, ordering his third whiskey and thinking about the injustice of a world that no longer understood or accepted people like him. And in the cozy living room of the Collins house, husband and wife were making plans for a future in which prejudice and fear would not determine people's fates. The road ahead was long, but the first step had already been taken. They didn't know that tomorrow morning, the story of an officer fired for a racist incident with the FBI director's wife would make news headlines across America, sparking a new wave of debate about the role of police in modern society. Little did they know that their personal drama would come to symbolize a broader struggle. Now they were just enjoying a quiet evening together, feeling grateful that the day had ended relatively safely and confident that tomorrow would be better.